The couple planned to get rid of the dog, but what they saw on camera left them shocked. Jack and Emily had been married for just over a year, and though their life together felt fulfilling, both sensed that their cozy suburban house was missing something essential. They wanted to add a new presence to their home, someone who would bring warmth, joy, and companionship. After weeks of discussions, they agreed they'd adopt a dog. One chilly Saturday morning, they drove to the local animal shelter, filled with excitement and nerves. The shelter was bustling with staff and volunteers, and the kennels were lined with hopeful, eager faces. As they walked through the rows of cages, Emily felt overwhelmed by the sight of so many animals needing homes. It was both uplifting and heartbreaking. And then they saw him. At the end of one row, there was a young German shepherd with dark, intelligent eyes and a calm, observant demeanor. He was quiet, sitting patiently, watching Jack and Emily with a mix of curiosity and caution. His name was Max. Emily felt an instant connection with him. She reached her hand toward the kennel, and Max leaned in, sniffing her fingers before giving her a gentle lick. Jack observed the interaction with a smile, charmed by the dog's calm but affectionate nature. After a few minutes spent getting to know Max, it was clear to both of them, he was the one. The shelter staff explained that Max had been rescued from a neglectful situation and had a tough start in life. Despite his rough beginnings, Max had shown remarkable resilience. He was friendly, well-behaved, and quick to bond with people who treated him kindly. Reassured by the staff's encouraging words, Jack and Emily finalized the adoption paperwork that very afternoon, bringing Max home with a sense of hope and excitement for their new chapter together. In those first few days, Max adjusted quickly to his new surroundings. He followed Emily around the house, often resting his head on her lap as she read or cooked. With Jack, he was equally affectionate, learning their routines and responding to gentle commands. Jack and Emily took Max on long walks around the neighborhood, introduced him to friends, and made a cozy bed for him in the living room. In return, Max showed gratitude in his own way. He'd nuzzle them, lie at their feet, or greet them eagerly whenever they came home. But after a few weeks, Max's behavior started to change. Emily was the first to notice. Max had always been quiet and calm, but he began to act strangely, particularly in the evenings. Instead of curling up at the foot of their bed, he started pacing in the hallway outside their bedroom door. He'd stand there, staring into the darkness, his ears twitching as though he heard something beyond their perception. Emily would hear him growling softly, his body tense and alert. One night, Emily woke Jack up after hearing Max whining in a low, insistent tone. Jack got out of bed, irritated but curious, to find Max standing rigidly by the door, staring down the darkened hallway. When Jack tried to coax him back to bed, Max wouldn't budge. He stayed in place, his gaze fixed on an invisible point in the darkness, as if guarding them from something only he could see. The behavior continued, and soon, it became a nightly routine. Jack would wake to the sound of Max growling or pacing near the bedroom door. Sometimes Max would bark at seemingly nothing, startling them awake in the middle of the night. Emily grew worried, but Jack tried to rationalize the behavior, brushing it off as dog quirks or signs of Max adjusting to the new environment. "He'll settle down," Jack would say, although deep down, the growing tension was undeniable. Yet, Max's agitation began to affect their lives. They felt a sense of unease creeping into their once cozy home. Sleep became difficult, and peaceful nights turned into hours of anxious listening as Max moved about, keeping watch over some unseen presence. The tension started to strain their relationship too. Jack's frustration with Max's behavior grew, while Emily's worry deepened. They started having small arguments, wondering if they had been prepared for the responsibility of a dog. Jack suggested that they might have acted too impulsively by adopting Max. Emily, however, was torn. Despite the strange behavior, she felt a deep bond with him. Every time they considered the possibility of giving him up, they remembered the way Max had looked at them with those soulful eyes back at the shelter, as if he'd been waiting for someone to understand him. It was that memory that held them back each time, reminding them of the responsibility and commitment they had made. As another sleepless night loomed, both Jack and Emily felt that something had to change. They couldn't ignore the problem anymore. Max's strange behavior wasn't just a quirk. There was something deeper at play. They knew they had to find answers, whether through training, professional advice, or perhaps a difficult decision about Max's future. Reluctantly, they agreed to try one last thing. They would set up a camera to monitor Max's behavior during the night. Maybe, they thought, the footage would reveal the reason behind his actions, giving them the clarity they so desperately needed. But neither Jack nor Emily could anticipate just how unsettling those recordings would turn out to be. The next evening, Jack set up the camera in the hallway outside their bedroom, aiming it to capture Max's movements at night. As they got ready for bed, Emily looked at the setup with a mix of apprehension and hope. She didn't want Max to go, and maybe the footage would reveal a simple answer: a creak in the floorboards, shadows from a passing car. Jack, however, was becoming more impatient. His initial excitement about having a dog was overshadowed by exhaustion from restless nights and mounting frustration over Max's increasingly strange behavior. That night, they fell asleep with an unspoken anxiety. The house was quiet, and even Max settled down faster than usual. But in the early hours, his low growl echoed down the hallway, loud enough to wake Emily. She checked the time, 2:30 a.m. Jack stirred beside her, sighing heavily. Max's growling became a sharp bark and then silence. Jack groaned. "This is getting ridiculous," he muttered, but neither of them got up to check the camera. Instead, they tried to go back to sleep, hoping the footage would provide answers in the morning. At dawn, they woke with a heavy sense of dread. After breakfast, Jack pulled out his laptop, connected the camera, and hit play. The video started normally with Max lying peacefully by their bedroom door. But soon he rose, staring intently at the dark corridor, his body tense. Around 2:30 a.m., he began to growl, stepping forward and fixing his gaze on an unseen point down the hall. His ears pricked, his hackles raised. Then they saw something that made Emily gasp. Max backed up, almost as if he were retreating. He let out a series of low barks, his eyes following something neither Jack nor Emily could see. His gaze tracked up and down, left to right, as though watching an invisible force drift closer to their bedroom door. It seemed that Max was warding off whatever approached. Jack leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He replayed the video, hoping to catch something he missed. "Maybe it's just his reflection," he suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. Emily shook her head, feeling an unease creep into her chest. Max wasn't barking at random. He was focused, intentional. And whatever he was reacting to felt disturbingly real. The nights continued in much the same way. Each morning they reviewed the footage only to find the same behavior. Max would growl, bark, and retreat, following the invisible presence that seemed to lurk in the darkened hallway. Jack tried to remain logical, but the tension between him and Emily grew with each review. Sleep-deprived and anxious, they found themselves questioning if the choice to adopt Max had been a mistake. The adorable German Shepherd they had taken home for companionship was now a source of growing unease in their lives. One evening, Emily tried a new approach, attempting to calm Max before bed. She took him on an extra-long walk, fed him, and stayed up late with him, hoping it would tire him out. For a while it seemed to work. Max lay by their feet, relaxed and content. But the moment they retired to bed, the familiar routine started again. Around 2 a.m., Max was up, growling softly, his body tense. Jack couldn't hide his irritation anymore. "This is getting out of hand," he said, breaking the silence as he watched Max's silhouette at the bedroom door. "We need to think about whether we can keep him, Emily. This can't go on." Emily looked away, hurt by his words. She didn't want to lose Max, but she knew they couldn't continue like this. Maybe we can try understanding why he's doing this," she whispered, clinging to a sliver of hope. "There has to be a reason. Dogs don't just act like this for no reason." The next day, she spent hours researching animal behavior online, looking up anything that might explain Max's actions. She found stories about dogs sensing storms, natural disasters, even illnesses in their owners. But nothing she read explained his specific behavior. One article mentioned how dogs could sense energies or presences that humans couldn't perceive. It sounded absurd, but the more Emily thought about it, the more she couldn't ignore the possibility. Jack, though skeptical, agreed to try setting up the camera in a different position, hoping it might provide a new angle or reveal an overlooked detail. On the next night, they adjusted the camera to capture a wider view of the hallway. Max's usual routine played out, but this time around 3 a.m., his growls grew louder and more intense. His attention shifted sharply, as if tracking movement. He barked at something near the end of the hall. Then he began to back up slowly, positioning himself between the unseen threat and the bedroom door. In the morning, Emily watched the footage again, her heart pounding. There was no denying it now. Max was clearly reacting to something. As they reviewed the video together, Jack and Emily sat in silence, the weight of the situation sinking in. Emily's heart ached, torn between fear and loyalty. She wanted to keep Max, but how could they continue living with this haunting mystery? At the end of the review, Emily turned to Jack, her eyes filled with determination. "We can't give up on him yet," she said, her voice steady. Jack nodded reluctantly, but the doubt was still there. They couldn't keep living in this uncertainty. It was time to dig deeper, to confront whatever was disturbing their lives. With a newfound resolve, Emily and Jack decided that tonight they would keep watch in real time, determined to finally understand what was driving Max to guard their door so protectively. That evening, Jack and Emily prepared for what they hoped would be a turning point in their puzzling situation. The idea of keeping watch in real time made both of them nervous, but they were tired of the unease that had invaded their lives. If Max was truly sensing something, they needed to witness it firsthand. They set up the camera with a live feed on Jack's laptop, adjusting the angle until the view captured both the hallway and the door to their bedroom. When everything was ready, they dimmed the lights and settled into bed, each with a quiet, unspoken resolve. Max lay beside the door, alert but calm for the moment, his eyes already scanning the hallway in anticipation. The first couple of hours passed quietly, and though they were tired, neither Jack nor Emily fell asleep. The house felt still, almost unnaturally so, and every creak or shift in the floorboard seemed amplified in the silence. They watched Max's ears twitch, but he stayed calm, and they began to wonder if tonight would be different. Maybe the mere presence of the camera would deter whatever was causing Max's distress. But as the clock neared 3 a.m., Max's demeanor changed. He rose slowly, his body tense, his eyes fixed on a point at the far end of the hallway. Emily gripped Jack's arm and they leaned forward, watching as Max's gaze followed something invisible. He let out a low growl, his fur bristling, and took a cautious step forward, his eyes never leaving the hallway. Jack's heartbeat quickened and he glanced down at the laptop screen, seeing Max's intense stare mirrored in real time. For a moment he almost expected to see something, or someone, appear on the screen, but there was nothing but empty space. Then something strange happened. Max backed up, his growling growing louder, more aggressive. It was as if he were standing between them and an approaching threat. Emily's pulse raced as she watched her loyal dog defend them against something she couldn't even see. The idea that there might truly be something in the house, a presence only Max could sense, sent a chill down her spine. Jack, still trying to rationalize the situation, whispered, "Maybe it's just something outside? Like a raccoon or a shadow from a tree." But Emily shook her head, feeling deep down that this was no ordinary disturbance. Max's behavior was too focused, too deliberate. He wasn't merely reacting to random noises, he was acting as their protector. Minutes passed with Max maintaining his stance by the bedroom door. The couple sat motionless, hardly daring to breathe. Eventually, Max let out a final, sharp bark and retreated, lying down once more, but his gaze remained fixed on the hallway. The next morning, Jack and Emily reviewed the live recording. They watched Max's actions play out on the screen once again, hoping to see something they might have missed in real time. But the video offered no more clues than what they had witnessed during the night. It was clear, though, that Max was defending them from something. What if there's more to this? Emily asked hesitantly, trying to articulate her fears without sounding irrational. She explained that maybe Max wasn't simply sensing an intruder or animal, but something beyond the physical. Jack's skepticism softened as he listened. They had seen too much now to deny that something strange was happening in their home. That evening, in a last attempt to understand Max's behavior, Jack suggested repositioning the camera in the living room. He aimed it toward the hallway and left it on for the night, hoping a wider angle might capture anything unusual. With this setup, they hoped to catch something, anything, that might give them a clearer idea of what was going on. As they went to bed, the house seemed to settle around them as if holding its breath along with them. Max once again positioned himself by the bedroom door, eyes trained on the dark hallway. The hours ticked by, and the couple lay in bed, each absorbed in their own thoughts, yet both unwilling to admit the fear that gnawed at them. At around 3 a.m., Max began his routine once more. He rose, alert, and stared down the hallway. But this time, as they watched the laptop, something happened. A soft, shifting shadow appeared at the far end of the hall. It was faint, barely discernible, but there was no mistaking it. Jack's eyes widened, and Emily clutched his arm, struggling to process what she was seeing. The shadow lingered for a few moments, as if testing the limits of Max's patience. Then slowly it faded. Max's growling intensified, and he backed up, positioning himself protectively between the door and the hallway. Emily's breath came in short, quiet gasps. The shadow, indistinct yet unmistakable, was gone, but the feeling of dread remained. They watched the recording several times in the morning, analyzing the faint shadow. Jack couldn't deny it any longer. Whatever it wasn't a trick of the light or a reflection. This was something neither of them could explain, a presence that defied their understanding. Emily stared at the footage in silence, her mind racing with questions. After a long pause, Jack spoke, his voice soft. Maybe we should ask someone who knows about this kind of thing, he suggested, finally letting go of his skepticism. Someone who can tell us if there's really something here. Emily nodded, relief mingling with apprehension. She had been hesitant to suggest outside help, afraid Jack wouldn't take her seriously. But now, after the shadow, it was clear they couldn't ignore the signs. Their home, once a place of comfort, had become a source of growing fear and uncertainty. If they were going to reclaim it, they'd have to confront whatever it was that lurked in the darkness. Together, they agreed to reach out for help. And in that moment, Jack and Emily took the first step toward uncovering the truth about their haunted home. The day after witnessing the shadow, Jack and Emily could hardly concentrate on anything else. Their minds raced with questions and doubts as they replayed the footage over and over, searching for a logical explanation. Jack spent hours examining the video, tweaking brightness and contrast, hoping to reveal some ordinary cause. But with every viewing, the shadow became more disturbing, more real. Finally, Jack admitted, "We're not going to solve this on our own." Taking a deep breath, Emily suggested a local paranormal expert she had found online. The man, Mr. Clayton, was known in town for helping people who felt unseen presences. Although they'd never believed in the supernatural before, the situation with Max had forced them to reconsider. They made an appointment, unsure of what to expect but feeling they had no other choice. When Mr. Clayton arrived that evening, he brought an assortment of tools and a calm, professional demeanor. He greeted Max first, kneeling to let the dog sniff his hand before gently petting him. "Sensitive soul," he murmured, looking up at Jack and Emily. "Dogs have a natural ability to perceive things we can't. It seems Max is particularly in tune with whatever's here." As they sat in the living room, Mr. Clayton asked them to describe Max's behavior in detail and show him the footage. He watched with a serious expression, pausing the video to examine the shadow that hovered at the end of the hallway. When it was over, he nodded thoughtfully. "It's not uncommon for spirits to linger in places they feel attached to, especially if they've spent a long time there," Mr. Clayton explained, his voice calm and reassuring. "From what you've described, it seems likely that the presence Max is sensing is someone who lived here, a former resident, perhaps. If Max is acting defensively, it could mean this spirit feels possessive of the space." Emily shivered, feeling a pang of sympathy mixed with fear. "But we've never noticed anything before." "Why now?" she asked. "Sometimes changes in the household, new residents for example, can stir up old energies. Max, as a new presence in the home, could be bringing those emotions to the surface." Mr. Clayton paused, glancing at Max, who was lying beside Emily, his eyes fixed on the hallway. "Max may be sensing a form of territorial energy. He sees it as his job to protect you from this spirit." Jack swallowed, his skepticism slowly giving way to an uneasy belief. "So, what can we do about it?" Mr. Clayton explained that there were ways to communicate with the spirit, to encourage it to move on peacefully. He suggested a ritual where they would acknowledge the spirit's presence, thank it for its past guardianship, and kindly ask it to leave, reassuring it that they would respect the home as it had. The idea of speaking to an invisible entity felt surreal, but the more Mr. Clayton explained, the more it seemed like the best course of action. That night, as Mr. Clayton prepared the ritual, Jack and Emily felt a sense of calm settle over them. The process began with simple, reassuring words. They spoke aloud, thanking the spirit for its time in the home and expressing a desire to live in harmony. Mr. Clayton led them through a sequence of words, inviting the spirit to leave with peace and assurance. Max's behavior became visibly calmer as the ritual progressed. He lay down, resting his head on his paws, though his eyes remained focused on the hallway, as if sensing the process at work. The room felt still, charged with an energy they couldn't quite describe. Emily felt a wave of emotion wash over her, a mixture of relief, sadness, and something akin to respect. As they finished the ritual, Mr. Clayton suggested they leave the camera running overnight one last time to see if Max's behavior had changed. They thanked him, both nervous and hopeful, and promised to call him if anything unusual happened again. When Mr. Clayton left, the house felt different. It was as though a weight had been lifted, the air somehow clearer and lighter. Jack and Emily went to bed that night feeling a renewed sense of hope. Max settled beside their door as usual, but this time he was calm, his eyes relaxed. Emily lay awake for a while, marveling at the stillness around them, relieved by the thought that perhaps this chapter was finally closing. In the morning they rushed to check the footage. To their surprise, Max had stayed quiet throughout the night. He lay peacefully by their door, occasionally raising his head to listen but showing no signs of agitation. As they watched the recording, Jack and Emily felt a surge of joy and relief. Max, their loyal guardian, seemed at ease as though he too sensed the shift in the house. But just as they began to relax, something in the footage caught Emily's eye. Around 3:15 a.m., the camera recorded a faint shimmer, like a trick of light, moving slowly down the hallway and disappearing near the front door. Max raised his head watching it go, but he didn't bark or growl. Instead, he seemed almost at peace. Emily's throat tightened as she realized what she was seeing. It was a gentle farewell, a final acknowledgement from the presence they had lived with for so many weeks. Emily took Jack's hand, squeezing it as the video played the final moments. They had faced an invisible mystery, one that had tested their beliefs and their courage. And in the end, it was Max's unwavering loyalty that had revealed the truth to them, guiding them through the unknown. As they turned off the camera, they knew that their home was truly theirs again, a place of safety and comfort. The sense of lingering fear had vanished, replaced by gratitude, for the spirit's peaceful departure, for Mr. Clayton's guidance, and for Max's unbreakable bond with them. For the first time in weeks, Jack and Emily felt that their home was whole, a place where they could finally feel at ease. As Max lay beside them, content and loyal as ever, they knew he was no ordinary dog. He was their guardian, their friend, and now the one who had brought peace back into their lives. The relief Jack and Emily felt after the ritual was tempered by lingering questions. Even though Max's behavior had changed for the better, they couldn't shake the feeling of unfinished business. The brief farewell on the video, though comforting, left them wondering who the spirit had been and what history might be hidden within the walls of their home. With newfound resolve, Emily decided to dig deeper into the house's past. She began her research at the local library, poring over property records and local archives. After hours of searching through old newspaper clippings and real estate documents, she found something that piqued her interest. A record showing that the previous owner had been a woman named Helen Warner. Helen had lived in the house for decades, moving in as a young woman and staying until her last days. According to the records, she'd been a teacher, unmarried, and described by neighbors as kind but reclusive. She rarely had visitors, and from what Emily gathered, Helen had lived alone in the house since the day she bought it. Emily's heart ached with sympathy for the woman who had likely spent her final years in solitude. Curious to learn more, Emily reached out to a longtime neighbor, Mrs. Pritchard, who had known Helen. Mrs. Pritchard was in her 70s, and when Emily visited her, she welcomed her with a warm smile and stories from the neighborhood's past. Over cups of tea in Mrs. Pritchard's cozy kitchen, Emily heard the story of Helen Warner. Helen was a quiet soul, Mrs. Pritchard said, her eyes glazing over as she recalled her old friend. She kept to herself most of the time, but she had a kind heart. People often thought she was standoffish, but I think she just liked her peace and routine. That house of yours, she loved it dearly. It was her whole world. Emily listened, feeling a mixture of sadness and respect for Helen's life. She could almost picture the woman, sitting by the same windows she and Jack now looked out of, finding solace in the quiet of her home. But as Mrs. Pritchard continued, a different side of Helen emerged. Toward the end, Helen became, well, more possessive of the house, Mrs. Pritchard continued cautiously. It was strange. She would talk about feeling watched or that she needed to protect her space. She even said she felt a presence, though I don't think she meant anything bad by it. Just like she couldn't leave it even if she wanted to. Emily shivered at Mrs. Pritchard's words, realizing that the spirit they'd encountered might indeed be Helen. Her attachment to the house, even in death, suddenly made perfect sense. Helen hadn't been a malevolent spirit. She had simply lingered, tied to the home she had loved so deeply. When Emily shared her findings with Jack that evening, he listened quietly, his initial skepticism having softened into genuine curiosity. The story of Helen Warner brought a new understanding to their experience. Max hadn't been protecting them from a threat but rather guarding them from a presence that saw the house as hers, a place she was reluctant to leave. Maybe that's why Max sensed her so strongly, Jack said thoughtfully. He felt her attachment to the place and saw it as something he needed to protect us from. They spent the evening talking about Helen, their thoughts blending sympathy with relief. The more they learned about her, the less frightening the haunting seemed. Helen Warner was no longer an anonymous presence but a woman who had loved and lived within the same walls. Understanding her life brought closure, as if her story had bridged the gap between their worlds. Before they went to bed, Emily set up the camera one last time, more out of habit than necessity. Though Max's behavior had calmed significantly, part of her wanted to know if there would be any remaining trace of Helen. As they lay in bed, the house felt different, lighter, almost as if the spirit herself had finally found peace. In the morning they reviewed the footage, not expecting to see anything unusual. And indeed, the video showed Max lying peacefully beside the door, occasionally stirring but never showing signs of distress. No shadows, no flickers, only stillness. It was as if Helen had finally accepted their presence, perhaps even given them her blessing. With Helen's story in their minds, Jack and Emily felt a renewed sense of belonging. They were not just inhabitants of the house. They were now part of its legacy, caretakers of a space that had meant so much to someone else. They decided to honor Helen's memory by keeping a small memento of her life, a framed photo they found online from an old yearbook. They placed it on a shelf in the living room, a quiet tribute to the woman who had made their home hers long before they arrived. Days turned into weeks, and Max settled into a calm, content routine. He still kept a watchful eye on the hallway from time to time, but the nightly disturbances had ceased entirely. Helen's presence, if it remained at all, seemed more like a guardian spirit, a benevolent watcher who had finally come to terms with the newcomers in her cherished home. And with that knowledge, Jack and Emily finally felt at peace. After learning about Helen Warner's life and sensing that her story was at the heart of their haunting, Jack and Emily felt a deep sense of responsibility. They believed that Helen's spirit lingered not out of malevolence, but out of attachment. However, despite the newfound peace, they couldn't shake the feeling that her presence might still be causing Max's vigilant behavior. Determined to understand if Helen's spirit was truly gone, they decided to consult a professional one last time. Mr. Clayton, the paranormal expert who had previously reviewed their footage, agreed to return for a more intensive session, which included performing a full ritual aimed at inviting Helen to rest peacefully. When Mr. Clayton arrived, he brought a quiet, reassuring energy to the house. He greeted Max warmly, kneeling to meet his gaze. Max gave him a friendly nudge before settling down beside Emily, as if sensing that this visit would bring closure. Mr. Clayton listened as Emily recounted the discoveries about Helen's life, her reclusive nature, and her possessive connection to the house. The more they talked, the more Mr. Clayton nodded thoughtfully, piecing together the spiritual thread linking Helen to the home. Spirits often linger when they feel unfinished, Mr. Clayton explained. Helen's attachment to this place might be strong enough that even after our last ritual, part of her remains here, reluctant to let go. Jack, though more accepting now, asked, "And you really think she's still here, even if we can't see any sign of her?" "Spirits don't always appear as shadows or movements," Mr. Clayton replied, his voice calm. "Sometimes they are simply present, an energy in the walls, the floors, something only animals like Max can perceive." Mr. Clayton began setting up for the ritual in the living room, placing candles, crystals, and a bowl of dried herbs at the center of the room. Emily and Jack watched, their curiosity mixed with reverence as they took in the preparations. Mr. Clayton handed each of them a candle, explaining that light symbolizes the transition from one state to another, a way to guide Helen toward peace. Standing in a circle, Mr. Clayton invited Jack and Emily to join him in lighting the candles. They held their breaths, struck their matches, and watched as the flames flickered to life, casting a warm glow throughout the room. Max sat quietly by the door, watching the ritual with his ears perked, alert but calm. Mr. Clayton spoke softly, directing his words to the unseen spirit. "Helen, if you're still here, know that your home is in safe hands. Jack, Emily, and Max respect this place, and they honor your memory." His tone was gentle but firm. "It's time for you to find peace, to rest as you deserve. There's nothing left for you to guard here." As he spoke, the room felt unusually still, as though it were holding its breath. Emily felt a sudden wave of emotion, imagining Helen as a young woman, full of hope when she'd first moved in and later, in her final days, unwilling to part with her sanctuary. She whispered softly, "Thank you, Helen. We'll take care of it for you." Mr. Clayton continued, chanting softly in a language neither Jack nor Emily recognized. The words felt comforting, like a lullaby, filling the room with a sense of calm. They followed his instructions to focus on feelings of peace and gratitude, envisioning Helen's spirit releasing her hold on the home, trusting it to their care. As the ritual progressed, they felt the air grow warmer, almost as if a gentle presence were acknowledging their words. The candle's flames danced higher, casting gentle shadows that flickered against the walls. At that moment, Jack and Emily both sensed it, a shift as if something invisible had let go, leaving the room lighter, unburdened. After a final invocation, Mr. Clayton instructed them to blow out their candles, symbolizing the closing of the ritual. Jack and Emily exchanged a glance, each feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness, as though they were bidding farewell to a part of the house itself. They extinguished their candles and a soft silence fell over the room. Mr. Clayton smiled gently. "That should be enough. I believe Helen has heard you. Whatever remains of her spirit, I don't think it will trouble you anymore." They thanked Mr. Clayton, both grateful and reflective. Max wagged his tail as Mr. Clayton patted him on the head one last time, as though acknowledging the role the loyal dog had played in bringing the truth to light. After Mr. Clayton left, Jack and Emily spent the rest of the evening quietly, feeling that the ritual had marked a true turning point. For the first time in months they didn't set up the camera. Instead, they went to bed with the house steeped in a profound stillness, as though Helen had finally found peace. Max curled up at the foot of the bed, letting out a contented sigh before resting his head on his paws. Emily stroked his fur, whispering a soft thank you for his unwavering loyalty and protection. In the morning, Jack and Emily woke feeling refreshed, their home brighter in the morning light, as if the walls themselves had exhaled in relief. Max seemed more relaxed than ever, trotting happily around the house, no longer fixated on the hallway or the doorway. Emily glanced down the hallway, half expecting to feel a trace of the familiar chill, but all she sensed was calmness. That day, Jack and Emily talked about what they had learned, their experience transforming their understanding of home and family. They had faced fear, curiosity, and compassion, discovering that even the unseen could hold stories and emotions worthy of respect. Helen had become more than just a ghostly presence. She was a memory they would carry forward, a part of their home's legacy. They decided to make a small tribute, honoring Helen's life and the role she'd unknowingly played in shaping theirs. They framed a picture of the house, placing it on the wall in the hallway. Below it, they left a small note that read, "In memory of those who loved this place." As the days passed, they realized that, while Helen's spirit may have been put to rest, her legacy lived on. In the warmth of their home, the quiet companionship of Max, and the resilience of the family they had become. Several days passed in peace, and Jack and Emily gradually settled back into their old routines, grateful for the newfound calm. Max had also returned to his usual self, relaxed and carefree, no longer keeping vigil by the bedroom door. The strange events that had once haunted their nights now felt like a distant memory, and the couple felt they had, at last, reclaimed their home. However, Emily couldn't shake the sense that something still lingered, a faint whisper of unfinished business. One quiet evening, as she and Jack sat by the fireplace, she expressed her lingering thoughts. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I feel the house is calmer, but I can't help feeling like we still owe Helen a proper goodbye." Jack nodded thoughtfully. Although skeptical at first, he had come to accept that there were things they couldn't fully understand or explain. "Maybe we should do something more personal," he suggested. "Not just a ritual but a genuine farewell. Something that acknowledges her presence and her connection to this place." After discussing it, they decided to hold a final, private ceremony. Emily proposed that they go through the house and share memories, both theirs and what they imagined Helen's might have been. They wanted to honor her presence by weaving their lives into the history of the home, blending past and present. The next evening they began. Starting at the front door, they walked slowly through each room, reminiscing about their time in the house while imagining what Helen's life might have been like. Emily spoke softly, as if talking directly to Helen, thanking her for the memories she had left behind and promising to carry them forward. In the living room, Emily recalled their first night with Max, how he had nuzzled up to them on the couch, bringing warmth and joy into their lives. "This was where you must have spent so much time," she murmured, her gaze lingering on the worn hardwood floor. "Thank you for sharing it with us. We'll take care of it." As they moved to the kitchen, Jack remembered how they'd laughed and cooked together, filling the space with the sounds of their lives. "You must have loved it here too," he said quietly, his voice filled with respect. "It's a place for family, for love. We hope we've done it justice." Finally, they reached the hallway where Helen's spirit had been most active. Emily felt a pang of sadness, imagining Helen's solitude, her last days spent in the quiet of this very hall. Gently, Emily placed a hand on the wall, closing her eyes. "We're here now, Helen," she whispered. "You don't have to keep watching over this place. We'll honor it just as you did." They concluded their tour of the house in the bedroom, where they had spent countless nights feeling both fear and solace. Standing by the bed, Jack took Emily's hand, and they shared a quiet moment, letting the house settle around them. A gentle breeze passed through the open window, stirring the curtains. Emily felt a strange, comforting warmth, as if the house itself were offering them its approval. After a moment, Max trotted over to them, sitting by their feet with a calm, contented expression. Emily bent down, hugging him tightly. "Thank you, Max," she whispered. "For everything." When they turned to leave the room, something unusual happened. A faint, golden light flickered briefly by the door, a soft glow that seemed to shimmer in the dimness. Jack and Emily froze, watching as the light grew slightly brighter before fading away, like a gentle, final breath. They exchanged a glance, understanding without words. It was Helen's final farewell, her way of acknowledging their gratitude and finally letting go. She had lingered long enough, holding on to the memories of a life spent in solitude, and now, with a sense of completion, she was ready to depart. The next morning, Jack and Emily reflected on the experience, feeling a profound sense of peace. They knew Helen was truly gone, her spirit at rest, her connection to the house lovingly passed on to them. With Max by their side, they felt they had become the guardians of something bigger than themselves, a legacy of warmth, resilience, and quiet understanding. In honor of Helen, they decided to leave a small tribute in the hallway. They placed a single white flower in a simple vase on a shelf by the wall, a quiet reminder of the woman who had loved the house so dearly. Each time they passed it, they would remember her, not as a ghost but as a part of their home's story. Days turned into weeks, and the sense of peace remained. Jack and Emily settled into their lives with Max, enjoying the warmth and quiet comfort of a home that felt wholly and truly theirs. The haunting was over, but the lessons and memories it had left would linger, shaping their lives in ways they couldn't have anticipated. And on the nights when the house was especially silent, when only the soft hum of the wind could be heard, they would look toward the hallway and remember Helen's light, knowing that their lives were forever bound to hers in a way that defied time and space. In the end, their home had become more than just a place to live. It was a sanctuary, a place of love and memory, held together by the invisible threads of history. And as they lay in bed, with Max curled up at their feet, Jack and Emily knew they had finally found what they had been searching for all along, a true, lasting peace. Months passed peacefully, and the house felt truly settled. Jack and Emily had integrated Helen's memory into their daily lives, keeping her small tribute in the hallway as a gentle reminder of the spirit who had once shared their home. They felt at ease now, as though Helen's presence had been woven into the fabric of their lives rather than lingering over it. Max, too, had become more relaxed, his once vigilant stance replaced with an air of contentment that seemed to reflect the new harmony in their home. The experience had changed them, deepening their appreciation for one another and for the quiet strength of Max, their loyal companion. Jack and Emily often found themselves reflecting on how much they had grown through the months of haunting. They had come to understand that a home was more than walls and furniture. It was a living entity shaped by those who passed through it, bound together by the memories and moments shared within. One evening, as they sat together by the fireplace, Emily smiled at Jack, a soft expression of gratitude in her eyes. "Do you ever think about how different things would be if we hadn't adopted Max?" she asked, reaching down to scratch Max's ears. He lifted his head, giving her a look of pure affection, his tail thumping lightly against the floor. Jack chuckled, his eyes warm. "It's strange to think about," he admitted, "but I can't imagine this place without him. It feels like he was always meant to be here, like he was the missing piece that made us a family." Emily nodded, her gaze drifting to the hallway where Helen's tribute stood. "In a way, he brought us all together. I think Helen saw that too in the end. She must have felt his loyalty and love as strongly as we did." The memory of Helen no longer felt haunting. Instead, it felt like a gentle, lingering warmth, a reminder that love could persist beyond boundaries, even those between life and death. Their once haunted home had become a symbol of resilience, a place that held within its walls the stories of those who had come before and those who would come after. On nights when the house was quiet, they sometimes felt a presence, a quiet echo of Helen's spirit. But it was no longer unsettling. It was as if she were simply watching over them, a benevolent force that had chosen to remain as part of the house's heart. Emily would often glance toward the hallway, half expecting to see that faint shimmer of light. And although she knew it was unlikely, the memory of it brought her a strange comfort. As winter turned to spring, Jack and Emily began hosting small gatherings for friends, filling the house with laughter, conversation, and warmth. Their friends often complimented the energy of the home, describing it as peaceful and welcoming. Jack and Emily exchanged knowing smiles, aware of the layers of history woven into the space, a legacy they now cherished and protected. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow across the room, Emily watched Max lying contentedly in his favorite spot by the door. She felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for her loyal dog but for the journey they had all shared. Max, with his silent strength, had brought them face to face with mysteries they could hardly explain, and in doing so, had led them to an understanding that transcended fear. With each passing day they grew more connected to the home and to each other. They no longer feared the unknown. Instead, they embraced it, finding solace in the knowledge that love and memory were forces that could bridge any divide. Their home had become a sanctuary not only for the living but for the memories and spirits of those who had come before, a testament to resilience and unity. And so, with Max by their side and the spirit of Helen woven into the essence of their home, Jack and Emily found a quiet, enduring joy. They had built something timeless, a family bound not just by the present but by the echoes of the past. And in the gentle silence of the evenings as they sat together with Max lying peacefully at their feet, they felt the strength of their shared story, the past, present and future bound together by love.